Welcome to Massive Action, a mass inbound podcast that enters the minds of those who are taking action at the highest level in order to dominate their arena and achieve success. Today we have our friend Jason Gueits from iHeartMedia, who is the VP of Digital Sales, going to be speaking with us about modernized traditional and some other different aspects of how podcasting and OTT and streaming works in the advertising world. So thanks, Jason. We appreciate you being here. And we also have Teddy with us today.
Yo.
From Mass Inbound, taking part in this awesome conversation. So yeah, we're really interested in learning more about what you guys are doing at iHeartMedia.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Jason, I have not seen you. How long has this been?
Oh, it's got to be at least 3 years, probably.
Probably more than that.
Maybe longer.
Probably
Pre-COVID.
4. Yeah, pre-COVID, so probably 5.
A lot changes in the media world in 3 years.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So let's really hop into it. All right. Tell us a little about your past role at Pandora and your current role at iHeartMedia and how you took massive action to get into the leadership position that you're currently in.
Yeah, so kind of my journey has been, I'm a University of Miami grad, started
Go Canes.
Yeah, go Canes. Started really straight out of college at Clear Channel. iHeart at the time was Clear Channel. I spent 7 years there selling traditional radio, both on the local side, and then I moved to the national side. Left there, worked with another national, what they call rep firms, who represent multiple stations, radio stations around the country, called SBS and McGavran Guild. So I represented a lot of the Hispanic stations around the country there.
Okay.
And then that's where I got connected to Pandora. Pandora at the time, this was 2013, 2014, was starting to grow a little bit. Spotify still hadn't really, taken its market share yet. So I jumped over to Pandora and I spent 5 years there. That's where I built up a lot of my digital audio experience, a lot of the digital knowledge, kind of built up from there. And then I made the move to iHeart. iHeart, at the time was growing as a, separate platform from the pure plays like Pandora and Spotify, but in a really unique lane because iHeart is a free app, free to listen to. And they were just at the time, this was around 2018, starting to expand on things like OTT, podcasting. And it was really in its infancy at the time at iHeart. So made the jump over. Started out as a digital specialist and eventually right before COVID started, I became the VP of digital sales for Miami, have since grown to cover all of South Florida, so Miami and West Palm as well. It's been an interesting journey just because of the change, right? Even in the gap from my first time at Clear Channel to now at iHeart, so much has changed even within that one company.
So with Clear Channel is like, what's the power of Clear Channel right now? Like, are they still a really huge player in the
They
game?
spun off. So when iHeart, rebranded, launched the app, they spun off the Clear Channel side. So you still see the out-of-home billboards is a Clear Channel. It's a different company, but they spun off from iHeart. Yeah,
iHeart's been on rapid growth the last couple of years, and then you entered the digital space in your position right before COVID.
It was right when I want to say it was January and COVID hit in March. So it was one of those. Hey guys, I know you put me in this position, but we're going to be facing some rough headwinds here.
No, that was a really interesting time for you to make that shift, and obviously no one knew, but during that time, I'm sure there was a lot of change, probably internally and structurally too. The products that you were offering, the services that clients were desiring, were probably completely different than what it was 6 months before COVID happened.
100%. I think one of the things that came out of that is, and obviously you can't predict these things, but habits changed, right? People started streaming more, whether that was audio or TV with OTT now.
Definitely.
And those habit shifts have stuck with us. People realize, hey, I don't have to pay $100, $200 a month for my cable subscription. I can sign up, for 3 or 4 different streaming services, whether that's like a combination of Netflix, Pluto, which is free, Tubi, and maybe Sling if I need to. Pick a couple different channels, and I'm still paying less than what I was paying for cable. Which is huge for OTT. And then on the audio side, same concept where, you can listen to anything you want. And with an app like iHeart, it's free. But even with the Spotifys and Pandoras of the world, Spotify especially really took a big market share there.
Yeah, they did.
I can assume that at this time that a lot of people are at home per se trying to save money and don't want to spend money on per se Hulu or Netflix, and so they're looking at these free apps, and then we'll get into how like those ads that roll on these free apps. We'll get into all of that, but the whole OTT.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, I think we see those audio channels, Spotify, iHeart, Pandora, those audio channels today are the modernized traditional. And the streaming platforms, Hulu, YouTube TV, Peacock, all of those. I mean, there's a bunch now, even Netflix and HBO and all these other platforms. It's more of the modernized traditional of TV. So it's that shift of what people used to do, the same behaviors in TV and radio, but now in streaming or podcasts. And OTT is one form of that. Can you dive a little bit deeper into OTT and what that is and exactly how it's being used in the world today?
Yeah, and OTT is probably like one of the worst acronyms for what it is, right? Because essentially it's streaming TV, right? OTT stands for over the top. And the idea when they came up with the acronym was that it was supposed to be over the top of your cable subscription, right? It's supposed to be, content that you're watching in addition to your cable subscription. Obviously, that's evolved with people just cutting the cord completely.
Replaced it.
Though there are plenty of cord stackers still. There's still people who do both. But ultimately, OTT is essentially anytime you're streaming long-form content, meaning like a TV show, movie, something that you're going to sit down and be watching in what would be a traditional TV environment in most cases. Yeah. But you're doing it through a Wi-Fi connection and you're streaming the content.
Yeah. Okay. I have a quick story about when I first learned the term OTT. So this is when I was working at Miami-Dade College, and I was managing over $2 million of ad budget. So Mark, one of your colleagues, came to me and said, "Hey, what else can we do?" And I said, "Well, how can I place ads on these apps on our flat screen TVs?" He was like, "Oh, OTT," and I was like, "What is that?" And immediately when he said it, I'm thinking of my great grandmother's house with the big TV. She'll go buy a new TV and put the new TV on top of the old TV, over the top television. So anyway, yeah.
Literally, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting how it's revolutionized, though. I did not know. I knew what it stood for and things like that. Yeah. And with younger age brackets, they've kind of transitioned with the OTT style. Streaming was just the behavior that it didn't have to really adapt to it. It was the behavior that they grew up with. Yeah. But for people that really did watch just traditional TV, it was a shift. But it is interesting that they thought it was going to be more of an add-on than a complete replacement of how people consume TV today.
Yeah, no, and when you look at the different segments, right, what you just described is a cord never, because this generation never grew up with, using cable and using satellite. So when they buy their first or rent their first homes, they're just going to continue doing what they've been doing. And we're seeing that in that 20 to 30-year-old, age demo. There's a huge percentage of what we call cord nevers. Then you have the cord stackers, which we described, and then the cord cutters, which is the, fastest growing. More than half of the US has already cut the cord.
Wow.
That inflection point happened earlier this year. So, if it continues in that growth pattern, again, it's not to dismiss traditional TV, but the trend line is there, and the scale is there now. Even though advertisers haven't completely caught up to it, they're still spending so much on traditional TV. It's more about right sizing, kind of that perception.
Well, I think people want to with the streaming devices, people can be far more selective in what they want to watch. Yep. So they're purchasing just HBO or just Netflix, and then they're putting together almost like a playlist of exactly what they want to watch. And they're doing that with any type of streaming, really, opposed to having just everything that they can possibly have to watch. I mean, if you look at it, if you have 1,000 channels with any type of traditional, TV platform, they probably watch the same 15 channels. and not much outside of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and therein lies the challenge with OTT. Where advertisers, I think, have and marketers have had a challenge trying to figure out, okay, how do I make this work? Because OTT is very fragmented because of exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Those 15 channels might be different for you compared to me, compared to Teddy. Yeah. So it becomes a a real challenge to figure out, how do I cover all of these all these different options, whether that's Pluto, Sling, now Netflix has ad-supported Hulu, every different publisher that I can cover. And within each of those publishers, I could be watching a multitude of different things. Yeah. So therein lies, that's really the challenge. That's what we've really tried to focus on our end. But, it is part of the landscape of OTT where how do you cover off and make a campaign successful while still reaching those audiences that are all over the place now.
Gotcha. Let's talk real quick about demographics. What are some of the demographics of OTT?
Yeah, so here's the great thing. In terms of usage, you're definitely looking at that overall usage, younger age range, right? So you're looking at that 20 to 49-year-old. Okay. However, keep in mind, it's digitally delivered when we're talking about an ad campaign. The ads are delivered one-to-one, based on the demographics of that household. So even if you target an older audience, 55 plus, 45 plus, 45 to 64, you're still reaching that household. You're just maybe have less scale in that age range, but you're able to reach them because you're not having any waste there. You're still delivering an impression to that person who we know is, of a certain age range or household income or whatever other targeting categories we want to add to it. And that's where it becomes more efficient than, say, a traditional campaign where it's more about mass reach and more about reaching the masses. So there's all sorts of, it's all about kind of aligning the strategy with that target audience that you're trying to hit. But yeah, I mean, as far as usage, definitely leans younger overall, though the fastest growing segments have been those 45 plus segments, especially as the audience ages in, that 55 plus audience has been using it more as they become 64, 65. Now we're good 5-6 years into it now where people are starting to get more accustomed to using it. Yeah. They're on fixed incomes a lot of times because a lot of them are starting to retire. Right. It's a much more cost-effective solution to just stream.
Yeah. Which is why I want to talk about that, because when I think about it, who's paying in the household? So we're talking about boomers, Gen X, or is it Gen Y? Gen X. Gen Z. Based on, because you have to be in the app for these ads to appear. Do you simply go off of the account, like the person who made the account, and that's based per the ads that are being served? Are those ads being served because of the demographic of the person that opened the account?
Yeah, so it's a combination of things. You'll have first party data, kind of like what you're talking about. Okay. That would come from registration data, like you said. So when you register for the app, you put in your email, some basic information about yourself. However, most of the real intense data, like the household income and some of the more intensive data that would make sense for a campaign, comes from third party sources. Okay. Yeah. So, and most companies use some sort of third party data source. The advantage of companies like iHeart, companies like Amazon, companies like a Hulu probably, is that we have access to a lot of first-party data. And the more first-party data you have, the more accurate that targeting is going to be at the end of the day. So that, even ourselves, we've aligned with partners like Amazon to be able to access that first-party shopper data. So we can target someone who's been shopping for something on Amazon. Perfect. But things like that, like those are the factors that come into play when you're trying to reach a person in the household. And yes, it's a mix of sources, first party, third party data. A lot of times, it just depends on what the category is we're trying to hit.
Awesome. Yeah. So, what is all right? Connected TV versus OTT. What's the difference?
So here's it's an interesting question, just because media companies do define it differently. Okay. I'll tell you the way we define it. We define all CTV as OTT. Because if you're watching on a connected TV, it's a large screen And that to us, that means you're watching something long form. That means you're going to be sitting there very much like a traditional TV experience, watching a movie or a TV show or something that you're going to be sitting with the family potentially or co-viewing and watching on a large screen. To us, that is OTT. That's also connected TV, because connected TV is anything you're watching through your TV that's connected either through some sort of streaming device like a Chromecast, an Amazon Fire Stick, an Apple TV box, a Roku box, anything that turns your TV into a smart TV is considered connected TV.
Okay.
Oh.
Your TV might be already a smart TV too. Now, all the new TVs now are.
Yeah.
That's also connected TV. So all of that is what we consider connected TV, and all of that is OTT. Now, if I'm buying any sort of advertising through, as you can imagine, I could be watching a movie on my tablet or my mobile device. Mm-hmm. There is some subsection of OTT that falls on those devices as well. So not all OTT in our minds is connected TV, can be connected TV, but the idea behind it is to give you the option, give the advertiser the option to say, hey, I want my whole campaign to run connected TV. Or if it makes sense, I want to run on other devices too, because I want to hit people on the move or, people who are spending time on their phones or tablets. So it's a loaded question, but yes, connected TV is for the most part OTT. OTT is they're synonymous, but in some cases, OTT can be on other devices outside of connected TV.
I think that's really important. You made a really good point with talking about how someone consumes content on their TV, but then let's say they're on the go. They're going from their TV and then they're going to hop on a flight. So if they go from watching something on TV, they're in their car, now they're streaming something on their mobile device, Spotify, YouTube, anything like that. Now they're kind of in a I would say more of a streaming of audio type of content. And then they go on a plane and they're watching something on a tablet. How can you move from device to device? Because I would say that it is more than likely that a lot of users are multi-device people at this point. They have multiple devices that they consume content on. And how can you transfer the consumption of content from device to device, but keep it seamless? Spotify does really well at this. And when I am listening to something on, usually I have speakers in my house. I'm listening to something. I leave. I go in the car. It literally picks up to the T right where I left off, from in the house to on the car, in the car, and I'm just listening to the same exact thing.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. The key nowadays is to have a multi-layered plan, campaign. Obviously, it can be with one provider like an iHeart. It can be with multiple providers. But the key is that you're hitting that target audience in multiple ways. So if you have an OTT strategy that's 100% connected TV, kind of what we were just discussing, and hitting them on a large screen at the home, that means you're hitting them at home that way. If you're hitting them with an audio campaign that reaches them on smart speakers at home, then you're hitting them that way. If you want to hit them in the car, that's the point where you want to have that streaming audio component that's more mobile-based, because most streaming audio listening happens mobilely, basically split between mobile and the smart speakers at home. Yeah. So you're hitting them there. Then you continue your OTT campaign and layer in a small percentage potentially of other devices outside of connected TV. And that's where you can hit them on the plane and the tablet. So the idea is really matching it to the client's KPIs and who they're trying to reach, because maybe it's not a traveler, but if it is a travel intender or someone a business traveler perhaps, that exact scenario is exactly how we want to hit them. Yeah. It could be a different audience, though. So really dependent on audience is how we layer these campaigns, but having multiple layers, and then obviously the foundational stuff such as search, social, all of those different layers that you guys help clients with, that is key to having a successful campaign.
Yeah, and that's what we've been focusing on mostly at Mass Inbound, which is not only bring an advertising campaign from device to device, but bring it from device to device with platform to platform. So now if the person is consuming content on Facebook or Instagram, or they're searching something on search, Google, YouTube, then they're also seeing that content, whether it's a display ad or it's an ad that's hitting them because of a retargeting campaign. And then when they go and watch or consume content in an audio or video fashion, they're then being hit with that content there, so that the advertising campaign lives across anywhere that they can be consuming content in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and that multi-touch attribution has expanded and grown light years, even just in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So being able to not just have those campaigns, but being able to show that attribution across the board is key. And it's something that is available now. That is something that exists now. We've moved from that last touch attribution, if they didn't click through, how do I know what happened? Right. We've moved beyond that.
Yeah, which was always my issue. Well, not issue, but kind of like my huge concern. Like, I'm like, how can I really like understand that the numbers are coming from here or here? I always had issues with the companion banners. I'm like, why aren't people hitting the companion banners? Why aren't more people getting to the landing page?
Yeah. And so for anyone in the audience who doesn't know, so the companion banners were something in streaming audio where a lot of companies still use it, but a companion banner essentially is a display banner that pops up while you're listening to your music or whatnot. But as you can imagine, when the ad plays in that environment, a lot of times people are listening on their smart speakers. Yeah. There's nothing to click on a smart speaker. They may be listening in their cars and driving, and so they can't get to a banner. Yeah. Or the product is just not something that's going to make me react that quickly. Yeah. We're not robots at the end of the day. We may think about a purchase, or it may not be an immediate decision for us, and we want to search or do our research about it later, which is most of our products and advertisers that we work with. Yeah. So in those cases, you were losing that attribution because there was nothing for them to really act on, or that, because of the environment and the experience, wasn't something that we're going to act on. And the same is true for OTT. Certainly on a connected TV, if you're watching on the large screen, there's things like QR codes that we can activate on and certainly give us some information. But at the end of the day, people are going to end up going to search. People are going to be retargeted on social, and it's all part of the journey. And that whole multi-touch, multi-layered campaign, it's why they work so well, is because we're now that we can track it, you're able to see that journey and and hit them bring them to the bottom of the funnel, like we talk about, to have a conversion. Right.
Yeah.
So with the retargeting, you mentioned retargeting. Is it that iHeart has a service where you retarget people who are listening and watching the ads?
So there's a couple of different ways to do retargeting.
Okay.
Off of OTT, you can retarget usually through display or other pre-roll video. And that's another big confusion a lot of times between OTT and what we'd consider like pre-roll video. Yeah. Pre-roll video to us is running before short form content. So before I mentioned OTT was really running ads in long form content, pre-roll video runs before short form content, meaning I'm going to be watching like a news clip or a sports highlight, something that's real short that usually you'll see an ad, and most of us have experienced this. We'll go to play the video. It's a short, like 15 to 30 second ad, but I could skip out of it after about 15 seconds. Yep. Which is another key difference from OTT. OTT, you can't skip out of the ads. You're forced to view them. Yeah. Now, the advantage of having that pre-roll retargeting is that they've already seen the OTT ad. Now the idea is, hey, they're less likely to skip because now we're retargeting them with a message and they can click through on it at that point. Oh. Yeah. So that's one way of having an actual click-through attribution. But beyond that, we do pixel tracking through third parties. We work with a couple different third parties like Claritas and ArtsAI to do pixel tracking, which matches back to the user who we serve an audio or OTT ad to. The great thing about that is, we can track across multiple tactics. So you can see streaming versus podcasting versus OTT and see the synergies between them, or the differences if we want to optimize and make the campaign work as best as it can.
Awesome. Now, one question off of that: when doing any type of streaming or OTT, there's a wide selection of platforms that are used for this. Correct? What are the platforms? How does that work?
So, in terms of platforms, are you referring to publishers or more about the delivery? Kind of like the delivery mechanism.
More about the publishers.
Okay, so in the OTT space, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, it's so fragmented. Mm-hmm. You can, someone could be watching Pluto, which is free, or they could be subscribing to Tubi or Sling, where you could watch anything. So when we built, and I'll use our example, though certainly there's a lot of different companies that are in the OTT space, and yeah, every media company under the sun offers some sort of OTT. So I don't want to make it sound like we were like the inventors of OTT or anything like that. But certainly, I feel like our advantage is really in our scale, the size of the company, because as you can imagine, just like all of our sellers in South Florida selling OTT, we have that scale and that bandwidth. We deal direct with publishers to access their inventory and place those ads. And so that scale gives us an advantage.
Yeah, of course.
But when you're looking at so many different publishers, it helps to have a company like an iHeart or any other sort of cross media company that can have those direct relationships with every single publisher, set up the platform, because you do need in-house, and ours is a fully in-house platform, though we work with Xandr as our DSP to place the ads. But you have that in-house platform to have different deal IDs, and deal RDs are essentially, in the programmatic world, deal RDs are like you can buy specific audiences and specific channels within a platform. So if I'm buying Sling, for example, we've set it up so we have news Sling, sports Sling, different categories within Sling and within each of the different publishers, so that you're able to target as efficiently as possible.
Makes sense.
But the advantage of that is obviously you're able to buy mass scale because you're able to use a company like iHeart to buy and get access to all of these different publishers without having to go each one yourself.
That would be crazy. If you had to go to each one yourself, that would be like full-time job.
Yeah. Is it possible to buy remnant inventory with OTT?
So I believe remnant does exist. It's not something that we do per se. I believe there is a remnant opportunity. What I will say about that is sometimes the quality, there's a lot of fraud out there.
Yeah.
That's one of the things really in the last 2 years that's been a big buzzword is the fraud around things like OTT, things like programmatic. Like, how do I know that the impression I bought is actually being delivered?
Yeah.
And so one of the things is that, across the board, iHeart as a company is MRC accredited, is double verified, so that the impressions that we're claiming to be delivered are true and verified, to be delivered. So when you're buying remnant, and again, we don't necessarily, dive into that space, but that would be the one area of caution I would say is just make sure that it's a company that can verify or has, that backing from a third party, that those are verified impressions.
Right. So what do you consider to be the major benefits of OTT advertising? Like, probably like the top 5.
Yeah, I'd say, the targetability. So the fact that you can reach an audience with no waste on a one-to-one level, right, is a huge advantage because you, especially with a client or with an advertiser who wants to reach a specific geo, you're able to target down to zip code level. So, as long as you have enough impressions in a group of zip codes, it can be very efficient for an advertiser to reach pretty good size audience without, spending a fortune, or definitely without spending what they would spend on traditional TV. So that, kind of like one-to-one level efficiency is one of the big advantages. Just the fact that it's an uncluttered space still. I think when we first started talking, we talked about how OTT, while the usage is close to half of the US, the ad spend is not half of the ad spend on TV. It's traditional still gets the lion's share of the ad spend.
Interesting.
And so when you think of that, difference in spend, there's an opportunity for advertisers to take advantage of a space where the audience exists and, and really take a mind share away from other advertisers who are stuck on traditional.
Wow, that is a big opportunity.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing you just said though, traditional, just so that for anyone that doesn't know how traditional targeting works, you're usually honing down to at minimum a DMA, correct? So now your DMA, which could be a lot of zip codes in some cases, depends on the nature of the environment where it is around the country, but DMA is you're as low as you can get with simplified demographic or geographical targeting. But a zip code is a piece of a DMA. So you can get far more granular with OTT than you can with any type of traditional.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'd say the closest comparison would be like cable, in some instances, because cable can go into their zones, but even then they can't go into individual zip codes. It's still restricted to the zone you're in. So, a lot of times this is like the next step. So, there's traditional TV. A lot of our advertisers, started off on cable and then realized like, hey, I need another partner, to really dive into the OTT space. The other thing with traditional and cable TV advertisers, they all offer OTT now. So that's, one of the things that, we come up against all the time. And, at least from our perspective, being agnostic in the TV space is an advantage. Why? Because of that dichotomy and that diverse number of publishers that exist in our minds. It's better to not have any like pure relationships that you feel beholden to than to have to be an NBC Universal that, hey, I'm going to run most of my stuff on Peacock or, run on one publisher. People are watching across the board, and you restrict your scale when you start running just on one publisher in the OTT space.
Definitely. Are there any other aspects of targeting that you would like to highlight that OTT has the ability to do that maybe traditional methods do not?
Yeah, so you can dive into audience segments, things like household income, things like travel intenders, skincare, beauty enthusiasts. One of the other interesting developments in the last year or so for us has been the ability to use location data too. Okay. So in most third-party data that exists, you're basing that data off of people's digital footprint. So where I've been online, where I've been shopping online, et cetera, right? All that data is accessible through third-party sources. Yeah. In location data, you're basing the data on their real-world behaviors. So if I'm going to the gym every day, I'm a gym goer because I can see your traffic pattern, your location pattern. If I'm going to McDonald's and Burger King, multiple times a week, I'm a fast foodie. So there's certain inferences you can make from the location data and then serve them an ad on OTT when they get home. And so that's a different type of data. Obviously, it's not, the location data with a lot of privacy restrictions now can be, less available, but it's certainly another neat way of targeting that exists through OTT. And then the last thing I'd say as far as targeting, you can even, with access to like Amazon first party shopper data, that's a huge data set to be able to access. Yeah, so you can imagine the variety of ways you can target someone based off of their shopping patterns, their search patterns on Amazon, even things they didn't even buy, but maybe search for, so there's a whole host of ways to target them that way.
Interests and behaviors are really amazing ways to target because you can really find out a lot about someone or about what their interests are and who they are and how they interact or what they're looking for currently in their life to be able to serve them a product or service in an ad that fits their specific needs at that specific point in time. Because needs and desires change, right? As people grow, as different life events happen, that all changes, and it changes very fast. Yep. So keeping up with that person's data in that regard can allow you to put a product or service or an advertisement of a product or service in front of that person at the best point in time, which is probably the most important thing. Because everyone might be a purchaser of a product, but that point in time might be different. So it's something to really note.
100%.
Right. I want to change it up a little bit. Okay. Kenny and I, we will sometimes come up with these scenarios, and I want to talk about events. Let's just say we're having a car event. Mm-hmm. We want to go into like a certain type of scenario for a car event. The question is going to be, how can OTT help that event versus traditional television?
So you want me to just break down like what we do in the mornings?
Yeah.
So typically what I'll do is for our sales team or for any of our account managers, what we'll do is I'll come up with a scenario, and it'll be a real life scenario. And then the objective is to come up with a tailored marketing plan for that scenario or for a pretend client in that case scenario. It's almost like a role play.
Yeah.
But instead of a sales role play, it's more of a media buying role play.
Gotcha.
So for this instance, what I would say is we have a client that is a car dealership that's putting on an event. They're bringing 100 cars to a specific location in, we'll just say, West Palm Beach, Florida. And they're looking to sell as many cars in a 3-day event as possible. The event lasts from Friday morning to Sunday evening, 3 days. It's a sales event, big promotions, big discounts. They typically use a $40,000 ad buy for the week-long event. They start advertising on Monday, the end advertising on Sunday. The sale only lasts 3 days. What would be your specific thought in how they should purchase media?
Yeah, I think the first question I'd ask is if they have any historical data on the pattern of where their shoppers come from. Because from a geo perspective, I'd want to know how far are people coming to these events from? Is it, pretty much relegated to a 10-mile radius, or, do people come from all over the county because the deals are that good?
Great question. So the answer to that, and usually I'll go back and forth and I'll answer that. I act as like the media or the owner in that perspective. So I'll answer that. Because of the nature of the car environment for the last couple of years, these are, we'll say they're more used cars and they're very specific. So a buyer is willing to travel up to 100 miles away.
Okay. So we can pretty much cover, the whole market essentially, if it's that wide of a range. I think there'd be a combination play here. You'd be looking potentially at a combination. Obviously it's a short-term flight, because it has a finite end date. You have the event coming up. For most of these type of campaigns, we run a 2 to 3 week campaign leading up. Really push it hard, and run across multiple tactics again. So I'd say a combination of audio, OTT with that visual of where the event is, maybe highlight some of the most popular, models, depending on, I'm not sure how the partnerships work as far as which dealers will participate and which brands, but anything you can highlight in terms of, the space and the selection, right? Getting people feeling good about like, hey, I can probably get a really good deal at this, at this sale. But using a combination of audio, OTT, some of your lower funnel tactics that you guys probably already do with search, social. We do have, there's some interesting tactics we use for car dealers. And this is probably going off topic a little, but we do have some interesting tactics for car dealers. One is called XVIN, where it can target users based on specific VIN numbers that a car dealer may have available, based on their search. So if they're searching for a Chevy Malibu, and there's a particular dealer in our network that has identified a used Chevy Malibu in their lot, we can then target them with ads.
Nice.
A combination of social, display, etc. Now that's a more of an individual car dealer scenario. It sounds like this is more an event maybe where multiple car dealers participate, or is it just one dealer, you think?
It would be, in this case, it would be, I would say it's one dealer, but they have a wide variety of different types of vehicles.
Because they're all used.
Because they're all used. So they're not particular to just one brand, one model. So they're it's everything that you can get out there.
Yeah. So the great thing is there's auto intender data, right? So going back to your point as far as like what part of the funnel that they're in. You don't want to get someone who just bought a car.
Yeah.
You want someone who's been shopping for a car in the last 7 days, essentially 7 to 14 days. That's really where the data set lives. And you want to hit those auto intenders. Even things like, going back to Amazon has Amazon Garage, where they can see the, people put their make and model of the car they have and how old it is. Yeah. So based on the data of how old a car is, they can then target users through an OTT campaign, for example. But we can use other things like audio to reach people and really build that frequency, that top of mind awareness. Hey, the sale's coming up. All sorts of models available. Whatever the offers are. If there's a certain financing partner that's available too. We do this a lot of times with credit unions who do these big multi-dealer, which is where my question came from, multi-dealer type sales. But yeah, I mean, the answer is it's a combination of tactics. Ultimately, if the geo is that wide, you want to hit them in multiple ways. So, audio, OTT, and then some of that lower funnel clickable assets as well, to make sure you're driving a lot of interest. And you want to try to pre-qualify as many as possible beforehand in that window. So if you have a financing partner. We can lead them to a form fill. There's a lot of data collection that can happen, because at the end of the day, you don't know if the event, and we've had this happen, the event comes and it's, living down here in South Florida, it can rain at the drop of a dime and it's a washout, but they have all this data to go and follow up with the, people who have maybe they couldn't make it out to the event, but they ended up filling out a form or filling out info leading up to it.
So how do you measure the performance of OTT marketing campaigns in this sense?
Yeah, so this goes back to the pixel tracking that I was talking about. We work with a couple different third-party partners, for example, but essentially what they do is they place a pixel on the client's sites or on the advertiser's site. They can track up to 6 different pages. So it could be, you want to see what that journey looks like, the home page, maybe a product page, a contact page, and then wherever that actual conversion happens. So in the case of a service, it could be a form fill. In the case of a product that they're buying, it could be the actual thank you page once they've made the purchase. So they can track all of that, put pixels on all of that. On our end, we put a tracker on the ad that we serve, on the actual creative. Okay. So since it's served digitally in a digital manner, we can track it. We can put a tracker, what we call a tracker on our end. So we know what IP address and what other devices through a device graph that household is using. Once they use one of those devices, a lot of times it's the same device, but in some cases, like in the case of OTT, you're not going through your TV to search for things. You're going on your phone.
Of course.
So if they use one of those other devices to then hit the client's site or the advertiser's site,
Gotcha.
That pixel fires and there's a matchback that happens between the two. That's where the dots get connected.
That's amazing, because my issue in the past dealing with leadership at Miami-Dade College was that, I'm trying to sell the concept of an OTT, which is weird to them, versus television, So the fact that you can track this, and you can't really track television unless you have a QR code or specific, vanity URL, vanity number, what have you. So that's amazing that, through OTT, we can track all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, having multiple ways of tracking is important too. Some clients, some advertisers use questionnaires too to ask, where'd you hear us from? They combine that data with the hard data that we know we have on the pixel side. Maybe there's Google Analytics data, so, GA data that you can take into account too. Looking at different sources is important. I never want to say that like one source is the be all end all of tracking and analytics. Yeah. You really want to look at the field and see where things are landing to get a good sense of what that return on investment is. And at the end of the day, it's about then using that data in a constructive way for future campaigns. Not every campaign is going to work 100%. It never does, right? Like there's no magic bullet. Yeah. It's about making sure that you're improving from day 1 to day 30 to day 60 to day 90, and that you're on a positive trend line to make sure that campaigns work. Yeah. Because ultimately, human beings are complicated creatures, right? Like we make decisions not in a vacuum. So, it's important to take into account all of the multiple touch points that there are and ways that you can track them.
How many times does your ad show up in OTT? Is it based off of your ad buy? Off of the ad spend?
So yeah, the ad spend. So everything, at least in our case, is based on a cost per thousand. So you're buying as many impressions as your budget would allow, right? Within a given audience. Now, there's obviously a cap based on the universe of people in the audience that you're trying to hit. But, that your question goes back to frequency.
Yes.
And you can frequency cap on both streaming audio and OTT. Some advertisers like to have high frequency. I personally am a high frequency guy too. I like to, bombard them with the message and make sure they've heard it or seen it as many different ways as possible. Some advertisers don't want that. They want their ad to be seen, a couple times a week, and that's good with them. So sometimes it's a preference.
Yeah.
The campaigns I've seen work the best are the ones that really get between that, 3 to 4 frequency a week. Mm-hmm. So over the course of a month, you're seeing the ad about 12 times. Okay. That's kind of in that range, but it depends on product. It depends. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of other factors. The creative has to be good too. Okay. Creative is so important. It's a factor that we a lot of times in strategy, we sometimes like put it off to the side. But if you can have the best strategy in the world, if your creative is not resonate with the audience, does not have the right call to action or the right directive to hold the user's hand on what to do, it's not going to work.
Now, going off creative, in your environment, whether it's audio or video format, how are you testing or split testing creatives and in any format?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is where the pixel tracking really comes in handy.
Yeah.
Because we can take two creatives and let's say, in our experience, we look at it and we say, hey, we're not sure which way this could go. Both creatives are very solid. In our opinion, they have good call to actions. They hit all the benchmarks and best practices that we can think of. Yeah. So in those cases, yes, we do an A/B test, ABC test if there's three creatives. And as the campaign rolls, we start communicating about it. We start saying, hey, creative A is starting to separate itself from the other two, or they're all working equally well, or, this is driving a ton to the homepage, but this other one's driving a lot more to conversion. So, and we start trying to figure out, okay, where's the disconnect happening?
So I kind of have a part B to this question. If you're using the data to then show you what creative is performing better, this would be very, very difficult in a traditional space because the data is lacking in many cases, or it's not. It's far harder to aggregate that data in any format, especially when it's like, you can get back to a conversion. You're kind of like, well, I think it worked, kind of.
Yeah, 100%. It's one of the challenges in the traditional space in terms of, doing that A/B testing, doing that true, creative conversation. A lot of times we're doing it backwards because obviously iHeart's a huge radio company. We have 850 stations around the country. So what we do a lot of times, we use the streaming to inform the creative on the traditional side.
Nice. Very nice.
So, that's one of the ways that you can kind of live in both worlds. Even in your example, 100-mile radius, is probably the DMA.
Yeah.
So in those cases, a radio buy could make sense. Even a traditional TV buy could make sense if the budget is large enough.
Yeah.
But that's where we'd use the streaming component. You'd have to have a digital component to it so that we can help inform decisions on the traditional side. It helps us see things. Hey, this audio is working better. Let's start running heavier on this one on the traditional side.
It's also far more cost effective because if you ran those two creatives on traditional in parallel, it would be drastically more expensive. And then you could also be wasting budget on a creative that you could have placed the budget on the better creative, but you just didn't know. So
100%.
The other question I had, and how I think going back to my question before in our scenario situation, we look at, and when we're building these type of systems out, we look at the type of purchasers, right? So if you had an event for a car space, in the car space for, let's say, used vehicles, you have people that are currently in the market for the vehicle. So that's like your really, I wouldn't say easy sell, but if you get the right ad in front of the right person at the right time, the stars are aligning. Like it's going to be a great alignment of creative. Your cost per acquisition is going to be probably the most seamless. Cost per click, you're just everything. Your view through rate, it's going to look great. And then you have the person who is maybe driving a 15-year-old, 20-year-old car, and the creative is more like, is it time for a new vehicle? Right?
Yeah.
And you're maybe pushing the consumer towards being a purchaser because it's that time. You're pushing them and leaning them into making that decision.
Yeah.
So those two creatives can hit two completely different personas in a different format. And you have the ability, we do that on digital all the time. We're taking those creatives, putting it in front of those personas based off of who the purchaser is, and then diving that one step even deeper. The person who's purchasing right now, they might be purchasing for a few different reasons. Financing might be the appealing reason, but it also might be, hey, we have a really good rate right now and we're doing $3,000 off the vehicle. So it might be a flat discount because they want a cash deal. So we look at one creative way that is kind of the decision of the persona, and then breaking it down a step further. And you can do all of that in OTT or anything that you're doing.
Yeah, it's a great point because, taking the targeting that you're doing and using the creative, marrying the creative to that targeting is huge, right? Because, you're speaking to people who are in two different points of the decision-making funnel. And you want to hit them with different messaging because of that. So no, you're right on point with that. It's a great point and a great strategy.
We do a lot of persona-based campaigns, which is, again, hard to do in a traditional space because I couldn't imagine the budget that you would need to be able to run dozens of different creatives. Yeah. And then you can only target so far down. You can't even hit that demographic as thoroughly as you need to.
Absolutely. So we're a podcast, Massive Action Podcast. Can you tell us more about what iHeart is doing in the podcast world?
Yeah, so along with OTT, podcasting is the other hot, tactic on our end in the digital space. We've actually become, and most people don't know this about us, we are the largest podcaster in the country. And when I say that, it's not just about the app where people listen to podcasts, right? Because we have the iHeartRadio app. You can listen to stations, you can listen to podcasts, whatever you want to listen to in the audio space. When it comes to podcasting, distributing the content, creating the content, being that creator and distributor is the key. Because when we create a podcast, that airs everywhere. That runs on Spotify. That runs on Apple. That runs on iHeart. It runs everywhere where people can listen to, because our concept is we want our podcast content to be heard across the board with no paywall. Some of the, there's a lot of big shows that you have to subscribe to listen to. None of our shows you have to subscribe. You can listen to them for free on Spotify, on Apple, on iHeart, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. So the key with building out that platform is the fact that we're very much an ad-supported model. We're not about the subscription revenue. We're about the ad revenue. So because of that, we want as many people to hear our podcast as possible. And then we can then target audiences within them across multiple podcasts. We can run a single podcast if we want a nationwide reach. Yeah. Or we can do things like lookalike modeling because we know what our listeners' behaviors and traits are, and we can create things like psychographic networks to reach them no matter what podcast they're listening to. We have like the specific profile of audience that we want to hit. And we could drill down to geo the same way as OTT. So podcasting has really exploded for us. And because of our leadership in the space, it's become a place where many advertisers come to us for advice, questions, how do I get involved, and so on.
So
awesome.
I want to make sure that I understand. So if you have a podcast and I want to get my podcast out, is that an ad buy through iHeart or?
So that's a different scenario, right? Okay. So one thing is running ads on or using the space to reach that podcast audience because it's grown so fast, right? That's one thing. Running ads on podcasts to reach the audience you want to hit as a part of your media plan, just like OTT. The second part of that is what you just asked. So now we're talking about advertisers who want to use podcasting to get their message out, to build their brand equity, to become build their followers, become an expert in the space.
Yes.
There are a couple avenues they can take for that. If they have a studio as great as this one, and they can produce content themselves, there's platforms like Spreaker. There's other platforms where they can go and upload the content, and the content gets distributed to all the major publishers, iHeart, Spotify, etc. We do offer a solution as part of a larger plan where you can use our custom team, our team that creates, that's all they do is they create podcasts for brands, and create a custom podcast series. We do have opportunities for that. It's just within the overall plan because, as you can imagine, once you create the podcast, the only way people know about it is if you talk to them about it, you spread it to your followers, you advertise it, you let people know like, hey, this podcast exists. You can listen to it on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.
Yeah.
So it's a few different avenues you can take to do that. We do offer a custom podcast team and their expertise, and then it comes with, obviously the whole media plan behind it to help support it. Gotcha. But there's other routes depending on budget. Obviously not every client's the same. To go through Spreaker and go through other avenues to upload the content and then, promote it as you see fit. Within what you can handle.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. So, excuse me. One thing about this podcast, Massive Action, I want to turn it a little bit. Based on your background, where you're from, where you went to college, your role right now as a VP, that took a lot of work. That took massive action. There's a mindset there. Can you give our audience like three strategies on how to take massive action, or what you've taken massive action in to get to where you are right now?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is always being willing to roll up your sleeves, right? No matter what position you're in. So in my management role, I think a lot of the team appreciates that I'm right there with them in planning, pitching, prospecting, closing business, every step of the way, I'm involved with them.
I like that.
Yeah.
And then always just being, educating yourself as well. Like what I know today won't be enough tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, being able to kind of always be willing to learn and having the, humility to say, like, I don't know everything. I think that's important, at least from my perspective, being able to continually learn and evolve with the changes. I started as a traditional radio seller, like just radio. That's all we sold.
Yeah.
Radio. Then there was like, hey, you could sell ads on the website, on the station website. Oh, cool. All right, nice. Here's some display banners I'll throw on Y100 and, we'll put it as part of your radio campaign. Then it evolved. Oh, there's this stream. You can listen to radio on your phone. That's amazing. So as things grow, being able to learn and adapt with them and learn what other new opportunities are, because it's happening so fast. What I know today is not going to be the same as what I need to know tomorrow.
I completely agree.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Jason, we really appreciate you being here today, sharing some information on not only iHeart, but the streaming world, OTT, podcasting, and everything in between. We really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us about that and sharing some insight on how the world works in OTT.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And pretty sure we'll have you back again.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Take massive action, everybody.
Yep.